Did you know that a lot of the problems facing the United States today were predicted by George Washington? Well, if not, you're going to find out today. So let's get started. How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Virtual History 360. I'm Mr. Wade, and today we are talking about the warnings issued by George Washington in his farewell address. You see, the precedent of a farewell address was a very new idea, and it served its purpose of laying out Washington's vision for our country as he quietly made his way back to his home in Virginia at Mount Vernon. Isn't that kind of crazy? I mean, think about it. He had James Madison and Alexander Hamilton draft or write this address, and then had it scheduled to be printed and published the day he leaves the capital of Philadelphia to head back home. Washington's farewell address was rooted in the specific challenges he saw facing the United States at that time, including increasing internal divisions and the ongoing external threat of invasion by stronger nations. But his eloquent message of unity and his warnings against regionalism, partisanship, and foreign influence laid the groundwork for our country as a whole for years to follow. So what do you say we take a look at his farewell address and talk about these warnings and break them down? There's three that we're really going to focus on. But let's get to the address. After opening with an explanation of his choice not to seek a third term, Washington's farewell address urged Americans not to put their regional and sectional interests above the interest of the nation as a whole. He said, and I'm going to quote the document a lot here, he said, "You have in a common cause fought and triumphed together. The independence and liberty you possess are the work of joint councils and joint efforts of common dangers, sufferings, and successes." End quote. Regions such as North, South, East, and West should see their common interest rather than their differences, he continued. Your union ought to be considered as a main prop of your liberty, and the love of the one ought to endear you to the preservation of the other. Now, let's continue along those same lines of sectionalism. Washington said one of the chief dangers of letting regional loyalties dominate loyalty to the nation as a whole was that it would lead to factionalism, or the development of competing political parties. When Americans voted according to party loyalty, rather than the common interest of the nation as a whole, Washington, he feared that it would foster a spirit of revenge and enable the rise of cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men who would usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to the unjust dominion. Anyway, would you believe that political parties had already begun to emerge by the time Washington stepped aside? I mean, they formed in his very own cabinet. That's why he came back for a second term, to try and unify everyone. But when he stepped down, So we have these parties. You have the Federalists, who drew their support largely from New England, and they advocated for a stronger national government and the fiscal programs, that means monetary, fiscal programs created by Alexander Hamilton, the nation's first Secretary of the Treasury. Democratic Republicans, on the other hand, were led by Southerners like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, and they opposed Hamilton's economic policies. They also split with the Federalists in foreign policy, favoring a closer relationship with France over Great Britain. I mean, take a look at this map right here. This is from the 1796 election, where you see Adams having more electoral votes than Jefferson. But look, you can see the split between North and South, can't you? Anyway, back. Washington supported Hamilton's financial programs and sided with the Federalists in supporting the Jay Treaty with Britain. You see why he gets lumped in with the Federalists, right? By the end of his presidency, Washington was weathering increasingly bitter attacks from his Republican critics, and His farewell address represented his response to such attacks, as well as a more general statement of his principles. Moving on to my last point, just as regionalism would lead to the formation of political parties, Washington believed partisanship would open the door to foreign influence and corruption. While he advocated for the United States to be on good terms with all nations, especially those nations that we had commercial relationships with, he argued that inveterate antipathies, that's big words for today, right? Inveterate antipathies against particular nations and passionate attachments for others should be excluded. Europe had its own very complicated set of interests, and the United States should keep its distance from European affairs. Remember, we were the new kids on the block. We were a young nation. Washington believed that we should stay away. He said a foreign policy based on neutrality was the safest way to maintain national unity and stability. In the United States, this kind of, kept us together, right? Now, although Washington saw the need for the nation to involve itself in foreign affairs in the case of war or other emergency, he argued that it must, quote, steer clear of permanent, it's a big word to learn, to know, permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. He felt that if we made a permanent alliance, that those stronger nations could just use us like a pawn in their game of chess, moving us across the board to suit their interest, solely for their self-interest, not for the good of both, right? So he said that we needed to work on ourselves and get stronger, and, have a better, footing before we mess with those bigger countries. So what about you? Do you agree with Washington? Do you think he predicted the future? I want to hear from you, so tell me in the comments below. And while you're there, go ahead and hit that like button for me. I love the engagement. We want to let YouTube know to share this one with everyone, right? And if you haven't already, please remember to subscribe. All right, if that button is red, let's turn it gray. And be sure to check out these other videos that you're going to see to the side over here. I have other history videos, U.S. history like this, or world history. I have civics videos, government, right? I even have videos that are shot in 360 that you can look all the way around. Check them out. I know you're going to like them, okay? Let me know what you think. So, for Virtual History 360, I'm Mr. Wade. I'll see you next time.